It was Mother's Day morning, May 9th, 2021. Families across St. Johns County, Florida, were getting ready for celebration breakfasts and family gatherings. At the Bailey House in Durbin Crossing, parents were preparing for what should have been a beautiful day with their children. But at 9 a.m. that morning, they discovered their 13-year-old daughter, Tristyn, was not in her bed. She was not anywhere in the house. The popular cheerleader and honor student at Patriot Oaks Academy had vanished. 8 hours later, her body would be found near a retention pond in her own neighborhood, stabbed 114 times. Before we dive deeper into this case that shocked the nation, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. This tragedy reached families worldwide who couldn't understand how something this brutal could happen in suburban America. But this nightmare didn't start that Mother's Day morning. It began in the early hours of May 9th, when two teenagers walked out into the darkness of their quiet neighborhood. This is Accused, where we examine the cases that challenge everything we think we know about crime and justice. Thank you for being here with me as we explore the most difficult stories that need to be told. This case shook St. Johns County and the entire nation because it forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that unthinkable violence can come from the most unexpected places. Today, we're covering the complete timeline of evidence that wasn't fully shown in news reports, the courtroom details that revealed the true horror of this crime, and the legal proceedings that resulted in one of the youngest life sentences in Florida history. If cases like this matter to you, hit that subscribe button. We dive deeper than anyone else into these complex stories that demand our attention. This is the story of how a 14-year-old's violent obsession became a 13-year-old's death sentence, and how a community lost its innocence on what should have been a day of celebration. Tristyn Bailey was 13 years old, a 7th grader who had everything ahead of her. Her family described her as pure sunshine, the kind of kid who lit up every room she entered. At Patriot Oaks Academy, she was known as a dedicated cheerleader and a straight-A student who worked hard for everything she achieved. Her coaches saw her determination, her classmates saw her kindness, and her family saw her as their precious youngest child. Tristyn lived in Durbin Crossing, a quiet suburban neighborhood south of Jacksonville, where kids rode bikes safely and parents didn't worry about their children playing outside. It was the kind of community where everyone knew each other, where the biggest concerns were homework and weekend plans. On her social media, Tristyn shared the typical posts of a happy teenager, cheerleading photos, time with friends, family moments that showed a normal, loving life. But that peaceful world also included Aiden Fucci, a 14-year-old who attended the same school and lived in the same neighborhood. While Tristyn's social media showed a bright, engaged teenager, Aiden's online presence revealed something darker. His posts showed an obsession with knives and violence that should have been concerning to anyone who saw them. By the early morning hours of May 9th, 2021, these two very different teenagers would cross paths in a way that would destroy multiple families forever. The last time Tristyn Bailey was seen alive by her family was around midnight on May 8th, going into May 9th, 2021. She had been at home getting ready for bed on what was supposed to be a quiet Sunday night, but sometime after her parents went to sleep, Tristyn left the house. Security cameras from the Durbin Amenity Center caught her at 1:15 a.m. on May 9th, wearing a white cheerleading skirt and a dark-colored shirt. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Tristyn Bailey alive. What happened in those dark, early morning hours has been pieced together through extensive investigation, physical evidence, and digital forensics. Aiden Fucci was also captured on surveillance cameras that night, walking in the same area at the same time. The neighborhood's ring cameras and security systems created a timeline that investigators would use to track every movement that night. Both teenagers were walking in the area around the North Durbin Parkway location in what appears to be a planned meeting. The quiet suburban streets that had always represented safety for this community became the backdrop for something no one could have imagined. By 1:45 a.m., two teenagers had walked away from the cameras and into the darkness. Only one would return alive. What happened next can only be described through the cold facts that investigators uncovered. In a wooded area near a retention pond in the Durban Crossing neighborhood, Aiden Fucci attacked Tristyn Bailey with a knife. The medical examiner determined that Tristyn suffered 114 stab wounds. Many of these wounds were defensive, meaning she fought desperately for her life. She tried to protect herself, tried to get away, tried to survive an attack that lasted longer than anyone should ever have to endure. The forensic evidence showed that this was not a crime of passion or a moment of rage. It was a sustained, deliberate act of violence. Each of those 114 wounds represented a choice, a decision to continue an attack on a defenseless 13-year-old girl. After the murder, Aiden returned to his home, leaving Tristyn's body near the pond. The timeline reconstruction shows he was back in his neighborhood shortly after the attack, acting as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Tristyn Bailey lay in the woods. A young life ended in the most brutal way imaginable, while her family slept peacefully at home, unaware of the tragedy that had occurred just blocks away. Question for you. If you were investigating this case, what would trouble you most? The number of wounds that showed this wasn't a quick act of violence, the fact that both teens lived in this safe neighborhood, or that there seemed to be no clear motive for such extreme brutality. Let me know in the comments how you would have approached understanding something this senseless. When the Bailey family woke up on Mother's Day morning and discovered Tristyn missing, they immediately called the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. This was not like their daughter. She was responsible. She stayed in touch. She didn't just disappear. Deputies launched an immediate search operation, treating this as a missing person case with potential foul play involved. The community responded in ways that still bring tears to investigators' eyes. Hundreds of neighbors joined search teams, walking through woods, checking retention ponds, calling Tristyn's name. Parents who had never met the Baileys before that day spent hours looking for a child they only knew from missing person flyers. The sheriff's office coordinated massive search efforts involving multiple agencies, K-9 units, and helicopter support. At 6 p.m. that evening, after nearly 8 hours of searching, Tristyn's body was discovered by volunteers near the retention pond. The scene was immediately secured as a homicide investigation, with crime scene technicians working into the night to collect evidence. Within hours, digital forensics teams were analyzing phone records, social media accounts, and security footage from throughout the neighborhood. The technology that had tracked both teenagers' movements that night would become the backbone of the case against Aiden Fucci. The next day, May 10th, 2021, Aiden Fucci was arrested at his home and initially charged with second-degree murder. But as the full horror of the crime became clear through the medical examiner's findings, those charges would be elevated. The decision to charge a 14-year-old as an adult was not made lightly, but the brutality of the crime and the number of stab wounds convinced prosecutors that this case warranted the most serious charges available under Florida law. Aiden was transferred to adult court, and the charge was upgraded to first-degree murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Digital forensics had traced his movements that night through phone data and security cameras. Physical evidence linked him to the crime scene. Most damaging of all, investigators found his online posts about violence and knives, showing a pattern of obsession that provided context for the senseless brutality of Tristyn's murder. Throughout the investigation, one thing became clear. There was no traditional motive for this crime. This wasn't robbery, it wasn't revenge, it wasn't self-defense. This was, as prosecutors would later argue, violence for the sake of violence itself. For nearly 2 years, the case moved through the legal system while both families struggled with unimaginable grief. The Bailey family had to live with the loss of their daughter while waiting for justice. Aiden's family faced the devastating reality that their son had committed an unthinkable act of violence. As jury selection was about to begin in February 2023, something unexpected happened. Aiden Fucci, now 16 years old, decided to plead guilty to first-degree murder. This plea meant he was admitting full responsibility for stabbing Tristyn Bailey 114 times and leaving her to die in the woods. The guilty plea avoided a trial that would have forced both families to relive every horrific detail of the crime, but it also meant that Aiden would face the maximum penalty available under law. In Florida, the maximum sentence for a juvenile convicted of first-degree murder is life in prison with the possibility of review after 25 years. The guilty plea moved the case directly to the sentencing phase, where Judge R. Lee Smith would have to decide Aiden's fate based on testimony from both families, expert witnesses, and evidence about the nature of the crime. March 24, 2023 was the day that would determine Aiden Fucci's future. The courtroom in St. Augustine was packed with family members from both sides, community members, and media from across the country. This was one of the most closely watched juvenile sentencing hearings in recent Florida history because of the extreme nature of the crime and Aiden's young age. The Bailey family spoke first, delivering victim impact statements that revealed the true cost of this crime. Tristyn's mother, Tristyn Bailey, spoke directly to Aiden, asking him questions that had haunted her since that Mother's Day morning. Did she cry for my mother? Did she beg you to stop? Her sister Alexis spoke about the sister she would never see grow up, graduate, get married, or have children. The family's pain filled the courtroom as they described not just losing Tristyn, but losing their sense of safety and peace forever. Aiden's family also spoke, expressing their grief and apologizing to the Bailey family while asking for mercy for their son. The contrast in the courtroom was heartbreaking, two families destroyed by one teenager's unthinkable choices. Judge R. Lee Smith listened to 2 days of testimony before making his decision. When he announced the sentence, life in prison, he noted that this was one of the most difficult cases he had ever handled, but that the brutality of the crime and the lack of any understandable motive left him no choice. Aiden Fucci was sentenced to life in prison for fatally stabbing Florida cheerleader Tristyn Bailey 114 times, making him one of the youngest people in Florida history to receive such a sentence. The sentence includes the possibility of review after 25 years, meaning that when Aiden is 41 years old, a court could potentially reconsider his case. But for now, he is serving his sentence at Cross City Correctional Institution, where he will likely spend decades behind bars. The Bailey family has said that while no sentence could ever bring Tristyn back, they feel that justice was served. They have channeled their grief into advocacy work, speaking about the importance of recognizing warning signs of violence in young people and supporting other families who have lost children to senseless crimes. The Durbin Crossing community, meanwhile, has had to grapple with the reality that extreme violence can emerge from places where it's least expected. Parents who once felt completely safe letting their children play outside have had to confront new fears about the teenagers their kids go to school with every day. Today, if you visit the area where Tristyn Bailey died, you'll find a memorial created by community members who refuse to let her memory fade. The memorial includes cheerleading palms, flowers, and messages from people who never met her but were touched by her story. The crime occurred in the early morning hours of Mother's Day in 2021, forever changing what should be a day of celebration for the Bailey family. 2 families were destroyed that night. One lost a daughter and sister forever. The other lost a son to a prison system that will likely hold him for the rest of his life. The most haunting aspect of this case remains the question that Judge Smith noted during sentencing. This crime had no clear motive. There was no reason, no explanation, no logic that could help anyone understand why a 14-year-old would choose to end another child's life in such a brutal way. For what? That's the question that haunts everyone who followed this case. 114 stab wounds. For what? A 13-year-old's life ended. For what? 2 families destroyed. For what? Tomorrow, we'll be covering another case that challenges our understanding of juvenile crime and justice. Make sure you're subscribed to Accused because these stories need to be told completely and honestly, no matter how difficult they are to hear. Tristyn Bailey was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a bright light that was extinguished far too early. Her memory deserves more than just being remembered as a victim. She deserves to be remembered as the joyful, determined, loving person she was in her 13 years of life.